The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. And sponsored by March Communications, connecting innovation and people.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Echo Chamber. This is Arun Sudhaman from the Holmes Report here in Hong Kong. And in the building today, very lucky to have with us from Omnicom PR Group, Mr. David Gallagher. David, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Arun. Great to be here in your lovely office and here in lovely Hong Kong. And what a magnificent day for weather, so thank you for that.
Yes, it is a gorgeous day. I'm sure it's just as gorgeous in London.
Possibly.
Possibly. So what brings you to this neck of the woods? You're doing an Asian tour.
Yeah, I was in Singapore last week seeing the agencies. I came today and tomorrow. I'm in Hong Kong, and then I'm going on to Shanghai to see the agencies. So
okay.
Part of my commitment to understanding the Omnicom offer in markets outside of the usual European and American.
Sure. And before I forget, happy birthday.
Thank you.
I saw a post on social media that you had your birthday here in Hong Kong.
Yeah, celebrated my 30th birthday.
That's 30 in PR years.
30
right?
in PR years.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So let's start with, you mentioned you're visiting agencies here in Asia for Omnicom. Obviously, we observe the M&A movements in terms of the industry. We just came out with an analysis a couple of weeks ago, I think it was now, where we tracked the deal making in 2017 compared to 2016, and saw there was quite a big decline, not just in terms of the value of deals made, but the volume of deals. So I think we'd gone from 61 deals down to around 40 acquisitions, and most of them were for small agencies. In fact, I think Paul Holmes called it a micro transactions or micro deals. So I'm curious to hear your views on this. Omnicom didn't, I think, make a PR acquisition last year, unless you count the healthcare or the remainder of Portland.
I think they finished a few deals. We finished a few
Right.
deals. So I'm not worried about any deal that began and ended in the year.
And in fact, WPP didn't make any acquisitions either last year. So curious to hear your insight on this, both in terms of why you think deal making might have slowed, and secondly, in particular, why you think it might have slowed at the big holding groups.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't actually aware that the decline was from 16 to 17 was as marked until you reminded me of it. So I'm a little bit surprised by it. In my mind, I felt like there was more activity than I guess there was. I know I've seen from different brokers and sellers, it felt like actually more opportunities come by last year than the year before. I think from my perspective, it's probably a matter of the holding companies having much tighter parameters that they're interested in considering, and probably the sellers being a lot more discerning about who they're willing to sell to from the past. So, so that's the only thing I can guess for why there's been a fewer number of deals and maybe smaller transactions going through. I mean, I will say we're very interested in looking at investment opportunities and partnerships. It's no secret that I travel around looking for potential partners, and that can be a more formal partnership with existing partners or an investment or even an acquisition. So I hope that your 2018 to 17 comparison will kind of put us back in the right direction.
I hope so as well, and I suspect some of it is down to the overall slowdown in the market that we saw last year. But it was interesting, your comment on parameters becoming stricter both in terms of buyers and sellers. From the buying side, how do you see parameters becoming stricter? Is it just a case of looking at a more clearly defined range of profitability from agencies that you're looking to buy?
Well, I mean, there's always going to be profit and gross and net revenue numbers that we're looking at. I think probably for me, it's more what's the fit. I mean, what do these agencies bring that we don't have already, and would we be better off trying to build it on our own rather than buy it? Is it a service we don't have? Is it in a market we're not operating in? So after a few decades of growth, largely through acquisition, there aren't that many holes in the portfolio. So it means I've got to have a pretty airtight case for making a request from the parent company. And I expect that the companies that are selling have a pretty good idea now of what the holding companies are offering, and most of them are doing pretty well on their own, and probably waiting for something that's really going to be transformative for them as well. So if they're being more selective and we're being more selective, it probably means there's going to be fewer deals.
Does that mean we're going to see, or we are seeing, a decline in perhaps acquisition of conventional PR agencies and maybe more interest in what you might call adjacent capabilities, whether that's digital or specific expertise?
Possibly. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to make an argument to buy an agency that's a lot like an agency we already have. I mean, that's not necessarily compelling for clients. It doesn't give the investors, the shareholders, something that they didn't have before. But agencies that have deep specialisms, real clear differentiated offers adjacent to the core proposition, I think would be attractive.
Okay. And how about in terms of the buyers? You said they're becoming more discerning. How do you see that? Does that mean they're not just less likely to take the holding group offer, and now they're looking at whether it's private equity or
the sellers? The sellers.
The sellers.
Yeah, I think that's probably another factor. I think they've got more options than they might have had in the past. So I don't know what your numbers are, but I would think that there's private equity, there's management consultancy, there are ad agencies, and then you've got the holding companies representing PR offers. So they rightly see that they've got more options than maybe they've had in the past too. So they're going to hold out for something that's really attractive.
But do you get a sense that there are fewer agencies on the market looking to sell than there were before, or is it much the same as ever?
I feel like it's the same. I mean. I get as many approaches from brokers or others as I have in the past. There are very few that I would pass on to the bosses. This is something that I think we should look at. But I haven't felt like the ratio has changed. I haven't felt like there's been a slowdown. So you've got a view on the overall market. I only see what comes to me, but I didn't really notice that kind of a decline.
Yeah, but I think you get a better view in terms of who's out there actively looking to sell. I mean, in this part of the world, I'm not going to put you on the spot by asking you about specific agencies, but do you see enough good independents that are going to attract your interest?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in Greater China, elsewhere in Asia, I think there are some good independents that are looking for their next step, but they too have got options that maybe they didn't think they've had before. I have seen some Chinese agencies that maybe were looking at IPO or some other way of getting cash, now are looking more for acquisition. That's been, I guess, if I've seen any difference in the types of conversations we're having, it's more about, where do you see your future? And I think 2 years ago they all saw themselves going IPO.
They did after Blue Focus, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And now they don't after Blue Focus.
Necessarily. Well, I don't know what the reasons are, but now I think that they're open to other types of partnership.
Could well be the same reason, because I think Blue Focus had some hurdles to clear.
Yeah, but it was it's a big enough thing it's a big enough force to move markets, to change markets. So
no doubt. Your thoughts on the overall market? I'm curious to hear, because obviously last year was not. I don't think anyone would claim it was a particularly strong year for the holding groups in general. Did you see a different picture from public relations agencies?
No, I mean it was a relatively flat year. Now that comes on years and years of growth, and so staying flat on years and years of growth isn't necessarily a setback. But I don't know that we're going to get back to double-digit growth years. I don't know where that would come from. I think that we'll continue to chip away at marketing budgets. I think that we'll continue. This might be a good year for on the corporate side. I think there might be a little bit of growth there as companies and institutions kind of struggle with a changing news environment. But I would say these are going to be low single-digit growth numbers for the big agencies. I have a hard time seeing where 10% is going to come from. I also think we've gone into the markets over the last decade where there wasn't much of a PR market. Now there is, so there's not like we can suddenly discover, a new world of PR opportunity. So I think it's going to be a scrappy year. I'm hoping for, I don't know what our official outlook is, but I would be happy most cases with 3 to 5% growth. And I'm guessing that's where most of the holding
You know,
companies are going to.
broken various laws with,
Yeah.
with this forward-looking
Yeah, possibly,
statement.
but yeah. Let's just say it'd be good for
It
street
would.
level.
Well, actually, honestly, I feel like 3 to 5% is a little disappointing, given that you would expect public relations to be outperforming other disciplines at this juncture.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I guess as always, it's going to be a matter of what's the wider economic outlook. I don't know that you're going to see GDPs in most markets growing much faster than that. So it becomes a little bit of a trade-off, and where can we steal share from from other sectors? I just don't know where it's going to go into double-digit growth.
But how about in the US? Because as we're regularly reminded, this is the greatest economic performance ever, and all down to President Trump. But leaving that aside, the economic indicators in the US have all been pretty sound, quite good.
Yeah.
So why the apparent caution in spending on PR? Or I don't expect you to have an answer, but what are your thoughts?
It's a good question, and I don't know really why the American client base, I guess, is feeling a little cautious. I haven't analyzed where they're shifting their money to, or if they're just spending less on marketing. I kind of think that where we're headed is to a greater split, if that's the right word, between corporate spending and marketing spending. And we tend to we do report it all rolled up together. But I would bet most agencies are going to have greater growth on the corporate side than they're going to have on the consumer.
It's a little ironic.
It is,
given that many of the big agencies have spent the past few years essentially turning themselves into, or trying to morph into firms that can attract the CMO as much as the CCO.
Yeah, it is, but I would also say that in most cases the marketing side of the revenue is still going to be bigger than their corporate revenue. I just think that if they're looking at year-to-year growth, they're going to have more growth in corporate than they're going to have in marketing.
Well, that's good for the corporate people who sometimes have felt like the unwelcome cousins.
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully
years.
they'll have something to celebrate. But I think there's always room for agencies that can differentiate themselves against the other PR businesses, but for the ad agencies. So there will be some success stories, and I think we'll be surprised where they come from and what sectors they're serving and how they define their work. So I think there will be some success stories, and like I say, I'd be very happy to see all of our agencies growing at a sustainable 3 to 5% rate.
You heard it here first.
That's me personally.
Don't disappoint the top brass. You mentioned the overall marketing spend, and to me it does seem clear that companies in the US, for Martin Sorrell, for example, has put forward a couple of reasons: activist investors, the popularity of zero-based budgeting. Are these factors that you're seeing as being material here? I mean, obviously, one of your biggest clients, P&G, of course, has its own activist investor issues at the moment, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't speak to that. I haven't seen activist investors being a factor overall for the sector. So maybe he's got a different perspective or a different client. I do think zero-based budgeting is a factor. I think if there's any one sector that is really outpacing, it's going to be digital and e-commerce, especially in this part of the world. And I think the PR sector overall still has a lot of catching up to do when it comes to having a really, truly digital proposition. And I think maybe some of our frustrations with growth have come from the fact that we haven't fully caught up to our siblings and other disciplines in terms of how digital the offer is. So, I think I hope it's a better year overall for the whole industry, the whole sector, than it was before. And I think that there will be some real success stories. But I'm not looking for a major burst of growth across the board.
You mentioned the influencer management consultancies. We hear so much about consulting firms and whether they're going to eat the lunches of ad agencies or media agencies or even public relations firms. Is that something you're seeing? Is it something that worries you?
I've been worried about it for a decade, and usually almost every year I'm reminded it hasn't really come to fruition, that my fears are a little bit unfounded. So maybe I've just been wrong about it. I do think, though, that in direct and indirect ways, we're already consulting with management consultancies. They're not brought into pitches that frequently. In fact, I can't think of too many times we've gone head to head with the management consultancy. So they're not necessarily a direct competitive threat, but I do think they're drawing away talent, and I think that they're drawing away potential acquisitions in ways that we may be aware of. So they're definitely a competitive force in the market, even if we're not seeing them in the in the reception after a pitch.
Yeah, I guess for them though, they don't want to be in the pitch, do they?
No.
They want to be, the people running the pitch,
yeah.
and making the decisions,
Yeah.
and then and taking it from there.
Right, and that's where my anxiety has been from. Not that we would be outperformed pitch on pitch, but that they would be running the pitch process, then running the procurement process, then running the agency evaluation process, which inevitably pushes us towards the more commoditized side of the spectrum of already feeling that. I mean, we have been feeling that for the past decade. Most of the impact of procurement, I think, has been management consultant driven, and something we were right about worrying about them before.
So you talked about this resurgence in corporate. You also just then mentioned the risk of becoming commoditized. And then you also said something over the last few months, which I caught somewhere on one of your many social media channels, which I thought was a really interesting observation, which was about a resurgence, I guess, in the importance of media relations to the public relations industry. And I thought that was an interesting observation, because media relations and the characterization of the industry as being focused on media relations is something that a lot of public relations people and firms, and I imagine people like yourself, have been trying to escape from for a long time, right? This idea that all PR people do is sell commoditized press releases.
Right.
But why then do you see media relations becoming even more important now?
Well, I wouldn't describe media relations as selling commoditized press releases.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
I do think that there is a fundamental part of our business is helping our clients understand how they're going to be talked about by third parties, and then helping them both behave and communicate their intentions in ways that third parties, journalists, media, others can write about and share. And I think that the industry moved away from that too quickly and maybe without enough consideration. So I've always felt like it was kind of an underappreciated part of our proposition. And I think you've seen in the last year, at least politically, the importance of solid and journalism that's based on facts and a relationship with people like us that can help provide facts. So, so I was never on the bandwagon of moving away from media relations. I think there are parts of the media relations offer that is commoditizable or has been commoditized, and that's something that we all have to address. I was thinking for a talk I'm giving in Austria in a month or so, that the future of the PR business has always been built on the kind of David Maister model of expertise at the top, so a few senior people who really know an industry and know primarily the influencers and the journalists who cover that industry. Then a few managers who are really good at managing projects and maybe have a little bit of that expertise that they can parlay into how a team operates. And then a team of people who are really efficiency based. Now, those are kind of the three tiers of a pyramid. What's been turned upside down now is that the expertise, I think, is lacking in a lot of agencies. They've lost track of the industries that they're representing, or certainly the journalists and the influencers that are driving those industries, so they find their value is diminished. Managers are struggling to manage a much more distributed workforce. So they've got freelancers and specialists and other agencies and digital services, automated services that should be part of their mix. And the efficiency of the teams under them are kind of undermined by the fact that sitting in a building with a boss over you isn't necessarily the best way to serve a client. So I think the agencies that are going to be successful are those that realize where the real expertise is right now. Has it shifted, or is it still fundamentally in knowing who's covering, who's writing, who's influencing your sector, your industry. Managers are going to have to be much better at working, at overseeing a diverse set of suppliers, employees, and partners. And efficiency is going to be a combination of your talent and technology. That mindset. I think they're still organized the way they were organized 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And in some ways they've even drifted away from the things that were good about that model. So you don't have to agree with me on media relations and whether that should be a core part of the PR agency's competence. But if it's not going to be that, you're going to have to be really good in other areas. And I just don't know that we've all made that leap yet.
Well, I think the way you've described media relations, it would be hard to disagree with that not being a core part of a firm's competence. I guess it's more about, and there are a lot of agencies and a lot of firms out there that do focus on the more commoditized end of that media relations puzzle. Interestingly, you mentioned there's a decline almost in expertise, which is worrying. But I would agree with you. I do feel like firms are carrying on in much the same way that they did, say, 10 or 20 years ago. Is it just the case that this kind of expertise has never been adequately managed in firms, in the sense that it's not been given the right career path? Because people with that expertise have been expected to become business managers, run a P&L, run an office. So PR person to a mediocre company accepted, of course.
or maybe they go on to be a great manager, but they, in either case, that expertise has stopped being available to clients. In the way it was before, and then by the time you try to get back into the game, the game's moved on a little bit. So, I think what you're suggesting is that agencies that can manage to keep people engaged and feeling like their career is progressing by actually serving clients and not moving out of a client service role and into a management role are going to be more successful. I think that clients will pay for expertise. I have found that, whether they're procurement driven or regardless of their sector, they will pay for expertise. But you've got to have actual expertise on offer, and it's you can't fake it. So I think agencies that invest in keeping smart people at all levels, but especially those at the higher billing rates, truly expert in that sector, in that market, with the influencers in a particular arena, who know when the conferences are, know when the editorial calendars come together, know who the social influencers are. That's still going to be valuable, and I think that's what we're asking all of our agencies to remember, that there are lots of ways ahead in your career, and serving clients is a pretty good one.
Is it happening often enough, do you think? Do you think that, certainly from the agencies that you see, are they doing a good enough job to ensure that kind of expertise isn't, I guess, kind of managed away from what they're good at? I've just been just over a year in the OPRG role, so I've been speaking kind of from a general point of view. I'll speak more specifically to the agencies. You can speak generally if you prefer.
Well, I've gotten to know all of our agencies pretty well, and every single one of them, a key part of their plan this year was to move more to client centricity. So if they're making investment, it's for people who are doing client service. If they are promoting people, it's people who are focused on clients. If they want to make a hire, it's someone who has a specific area of expertise to serve clients. And maybe they're always doing that, and I just didn't know them because I wasn't part of them. But I think that's going to be a key part of their success going forward. And the agencies that I hear people talk about, whether they're in our group or not, it's not the agencies that will say, "Wow, they have a really great general manager in Argentina," or even their CEO is really great. It's that they do really great work on X client, or they've got a really good offer in Y area. And that's how you end up getting, keeping the clients you have and winning new opportunities. So it's not as complex as they are, and that's if you are known for your expertise in client service, it's a much better proposition than being known for how great your executive management team is. Sure.
Okay, so let's change direction a little bit here. I wanted to talk to you about Davos taking place next week, the World Economic Forum. I know you have been there several times in the past. In fact, you helped put together Ketchum's collaboration with With what?
Yeah, that was in 2004. I had to go back for some other reason, go back and look at that. So our first interaction with the World Economic Forum, the people who put on Davos, was back in 2004. So over that 13-year period, I've gone a few times, both as an agency person supporting the forum, an agency person supporting clients, and then as a delegate, as a participant in the forum. So I've kind of seen it from different angles.
So this will be I think it's the fourth time, I'm not sure. But I noticed last year Davos felt certainly less relevant than it has done in previous years. And it's kind of, it's always fashionable to poke fun at Davos and say this is just a bunch of rich people and business leaders pretending that they care about the world, and honestly you couldn't find a group of more tone-deaf people in the world. And I would agree with some of that. But last year in particular, you really felt that the whole Davos consensus had been upended, right? You had things that the Davos elite were firmly opposed to had all come true, right? In fact, I saw one management professor who said, basically, if you really want to understand the world, you look at what the Davos elite consensus is, and then you do the exact opposite. And he said this in Davos. And everyone was like, oh, that's really smart. Right. So that was last year. Donald Trump, of course, didn't turn up. He sent, of all people, the mooch, Anthony Scaramucci,
that's right,
who lasted a couple of days before he went back, because apparently he was worried about what job he was going to get. And this is all detailed in Michael Wolff's excellent book. Donald Trump is coming this year. The Indian president is coming. I think the Chinese premier is coming. The hope is that perhaps Davos will play a more material role in helping to somehow bring a sense of cohesion to this somewhat fractured landscape we find ourselves in. Do you feel that's a realistic goal, or should we lower our expectations of Davos?
I don't know that I would lower my expectations. I mean, I wasn't there last year, so I don't know how to compare what was happening on the ground to the way things were reported about it. And I would agree with you that there is, it seems like everywhere, this schism between elite expert, in quotes, perspective versus a more populist point of view, and those seem to be in conflict, or at least are reported to be in conflict. And I can't deny that that seems to be the way politics and business and society is discussed right now. I guess my experience from the forum is beyond Davos, and just looking at the organization, the types of ideas they put forward. And I still have yet to find any event or venue or forum that is capable of pulling together such a diverse set of far-ranging perspectives. I mean, for me, I hadn't heard or didn't appreciate the impact of globalization until I was at the World Economic Forum and saw how globalization is realized, for better or for worse. And it's kind of that organization that opened my eyes to globalization. And that was 2005, I guess. I hadn't really thought about hyperconnectivity or artificial intelligence with the World Economic Forum, and what sort of impact that would have on business or society or politics. So I still think it's a source of truly transformative ideas percolate there. They're kind of reported at the event, and then you see over the course of the year whether that has any influence on the agenda or people are still talking about it. But I still don't see too many organizations that have that kind of reach or perspective for what the future is going to be like, short term and long term. So I don't know what will happen. There's always the hard news headlines, and that's usually dominated by the celebrities or the heads of state that are there. Yeah. But I suggest the themes that come out of it will actually be important and will be relevant to the way business is done, and the way governments are run, and the way society works. So that's I'm still as you gather, I'm still a World Economic Forum fan.
It's a classic PR problem,
yeah,
in a way.
Yeah.
Right? The perception has maybe not caught up with reality, and the perception is dominated by, as you described it, the celebrities. And
it is their challenge. I mean, it's an organization that works throughout the year, but its reputation is defined in a 1 week at the beginning, and often in a neutral to negative way. So it's hard to kind of maintain a positive image or perception. But if you dig in and you understand how the organization works and how it advances collaboration between different sectors of society, you do see that more often, especially over a decade-long curve, more often they're right than wrong in terms of where things are headed. So so I wouldn't give up on the event or the organization itself, and I'm kind of envious that you're going to get to go and hear these things firsthand. So.
Well, the good news is President Trump hasn't given up on Davos either.
Apparently not. Yeah, I was very surprised to hear that he was participating. It seems like the opposite of his campaign persona, at least. But
Little genius girl.
True, right? It's
So on that idea of themes and trends that define the ad, I don't think the World Economic Forum has actually come out yet with the sort of headline themes for Davos. But what do you think are the things that you're thinking about in terms of themes that will affect public relations this year? So whether it's artificial intelligence, or something like blockchain, or the ubiquity of Alexa devices.
Yeah.
What's on your mind?
I think all of those are kind of possible influencing trends. I find usually tech expresses itself more slowly than we actually think. And by slowly, I mean it takes 3 or 4 years for some of these things to work their way into day-to-day practice. And it's fun to talk about it now and put them into our annual forecast to 2018 trends. And I guarantee every organization, every agency's forecast includes cryptocurrency or artificial intelligence or augmented reality. And there will be cases that can be shown that reflect how that's being built into our work. It still won't be none of those things will be the lion's share of anything we do this year or maybe even next year. But you will start to see them folded in. I do think there are a few things that will have more of an impact more quickly, and you mentioned one. And I think voice activation technology, I think, will rapidly insert itself into our thinking and planning, and you'll probably need some concept of that for proposals. In terms of how will you deal with the way you talk about certain brands, how will you keep that consumer interaction in part of your thinking. I think live video, which has definitely kind of gotten a boost with Facebook's recent reconsideration of how it's going to deal with publishers. I think it's partly for them to push live video, their own live video prospect forward, and I think that brands and organizations will start making better use of that. I think you will see that, and probably in your own awards programs, you'll start seeing some campaigns that center on those two technologies. Bitcoin, or other than as an investment, good or bad prospect, I've been trying to figure out where blockchain technology could be applied to some of the other challenges that we're facing beyond PR, but in society, and definitely the veracity of news and reporting has been drawn into question, rightly or wrongly, partly by the Brexit campaign, partly by the Trump campaign, and then it seems like anything that comes up now is subject to a charge of fake news. And I have to think that there is some sort of blockchain solution, at least in terms of how stories are generated and reported, that could be put at play. There is a platform called Steam that I don't know if you're familiar with it. I just started playing around with it, but it's a community of contributors that generate Steam, kind of units of credit based on the credibility of their content, and it seems to be an early stages of its development. I'm still trying to figure out how to make it work, both for my own interest and for clients. But it's a truly community policed content and journalistic approach to developing news stories or ideas. So I don't know that everything's going to go to a Steam type platform, but it's just interesting to me that people outside the main publishing community are seeing a market for validated news. And it almost kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about where does media relations fall in the people are desperate, I think, or at least interested in news that they can trust and believe. ensure there's peer review and recommendations for your friend and crowdsourcing, and those are all part of the mix of services for us. But it's I think what we've seen is it's too early to count out publishers, and especially social media platforms and publishers, as a huge source of influence and credibility. And,
that's true. Although it seems clear that they are on the back foot.
Publishers.
So, the big social media platforms.
Yeah, there is. You've seen it, especially in Europe. Governments wanting more direct control of the platforms for what they publish, and that can be whether it's fake news or bot-generated news or obvious propaganda or hate speech. And I think that all of that further undermines the trust that consumers have in what they're seeing on screen, but it doesn't diminish their appetite for information that they can believe and act on. And I think that's both a challenge and opportunity for the PR community to recognize that just because the ways people have engaged with brands or companies has changed doesn't mean that they don't want to engage in some or understand in some meaningful way brands or companies. And I think agencies that understand that and help companies solve that will be more successful than those that don't.
I saw that there was a story about they tried to write a movie using an algorithm, and it go well at all. Does this make you relax? Do you feel a bit better now that the robots are not going to replace PR people anytime soon?
I don't know if the robots are going to replace PR people, but I think they will. I think there will be algorithms and software that increasingly does things that we've done in the past, whether it's a media report or a summary of media content related to a campaign or project. I think there are already services that are doing that. So I think that there will be more software solutions for what we do. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it should push us up the hierarchy in some ways, and again force us to be focus on expertise and less on efficiency. My earlier description is probably a little bit convoluted, but agencies have thrived on efficiency. On doing mid-level to low-level work more efficiently than clients can do it on their own. That's been the agency model, in not just in PR, in almost anything. So until we can put that aside and really focus on expertise, we're going to be stuck wishing for a seat at the table, wishing we were being taken as seriously as management consultants or lawyers. And the truth is, we don't have that level in general. We haven't acquired that level of expertise. So I'm hoping that by surrendering some parts of the service proposition to automation, we'll be forced to take the higher end of the service opportunity a lot more seriously and put our efforts in giving that kind of service rather than the efficiency-based service.
Well said, and fighting words.
Yeah, we'll see.
For 2018 and beyond. David, thank you so much for flying
pleasure.
all this way just to take part in the podcast. While you're here, I would suggest you meet with your agencies and maybe talk to some acquisition prospects.
You never know.
But yes, thank you so much. It's great to have you in the Echo Chamber, as always, and we'll have you back soon, I'm sure. Thank you all for listening. You can get us on iTunes, on all podcast platforms. Please do rate and review us, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by March Communications, connecting innovation and people.